So right now I'm en route to a spot where the sun's gonna be awesome. The sunset, I've shot here one other time and I've been wanting to come back. It was last year and it was one of the most epic spots I think I've shot in where I live. And tonight I'm thinking sunset's gonna be really awesome. So hopefully we get the color I'm expecting to get. It was raining earlier today. That broke. It's still a little damp out, a little bit humid, so I'm hoping that results in a lot of color. Okay, so we made it to the destination, but now we have to climb all the way up to the top of the cliffs here through the woods. As you can see, I got a pretty steady uphill climb. So once we get up there, we'll start setting up the gear. So this is pretty much the view tonight for sunset, and to give you an idea, we got a little bit of some really nice clouds working, so this should be good. Okay, so what we got going on here is the Sony A7 is set up right over there, and I'll zoom in so you can see it, and it's on the Vanguard tripod. And basically what we have going on in the background here is we've got these sheer rock cliffs that are really amazing, and once the sun goes down we're gonna have some really nice color up in there. So right now we have the sun breaking through the clouds and we're about to start getting some color, I just can tell. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a test shot to make sure that everything's working good and we got a good look. So while that's taking, right now I'm at about 10 seconds at ISO 125, and we're focused out to infinity so that we get the rock formations and the sun all in crystal clear at f5.6. Now, at 10 seconds, my shadows are really dark, but my sky looks really good. So what I'm going to do is take one more shot like this, and I'm going to do it with a longer exposure to bring out all the shadow detail. So now we're at 15 seconds. And what this will do is this will bring out all that shadow. So then we don't have to pump it up too much in post with the one file, and we can get a little bit less grain. So let's get into these images. I've already selected the ones that I want to use and that I know I use for the panorama. And the first thing we can do here is uncheck all of them and then come back in and start editing the first one. We want to go to the develop module, and it's so dark. And the one thing I want to point out we want to pay attention to is the water and the foreground. I don't care what's going on with the sky. All I care about is that foreground. So first, I'm going to pull up some exposure, and I'm going to pull up some shadow. So now as this is revealing more of this foreground, I'm going to pull back on the highlights to save the water. There we go. And then I'm going to warm up my image, because it's really cold right now. And mind you, I shot this with a 10-stop filter. Mine usually runs a little bit on the warmer side. However, for some reason this night and the way the A7 handles color, it actually came out a little bit colder than I was expecting, which is not a problem because I shoot in their ARW format, and which is like the Nikon RAW file, and you can just basically adjust white balance to your taste. So once I've found a white balance that I'm happy with, which for me, I'm thinking somewhere around the 5261 mark, and maybe just a punch of magenta. Yeah, I like that. That looks good. So now I've got a nice color that I want to work here with. One of the other things I could do is I could also pump up vibrance, but because we're going to merge all of these, I'm not going to worry about that. Next, we want to set up a lens correction, or a lens profile correction, to get rid of any of that distortion. So now, because this was shot with a Nikon 24mm f2.8, I'm going to select that, and you'll see what it'll do. It'll even out the horizon line and kind of fix some of the bowing that was going on. So let's take a look. Before we corrected it, and then after, as you can see, it straightens that horizon. So next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead here and sync this data that we just corrected, or these changes, to our total image. So we're going to go ahead and select all of those and sync it. Now I know the last one's a bit more overexposed, which is okay, because we'll pull that one back. I just want the color tones and I want all the initial setup to be the same. And you can really see that 10-stop filter and 20 seconds, you get these streaks of reflections off of those clouds in the water, which sadly we won't get much of with the vertical shot, but we'll get a little bit. Now with the last one here that gives us a bit more of the foreground, you can see that it's a little too bright, so I'm going to bring that one back into the develop module and just pull back a little bit on some of those corrections that we have made. So we're going to pull back on the exposure, and I'm not going to pull too far. Bringing it probably right back down to, actually we'll just set it right back to 0 because I think that'll get us to where we need to be. I'm going to just pull back on those shadows as well. So now that we're pretty much right at the same exposure throughout. Next we want to work on the sky images. So we go back to our grid and we come over here to the sky. I'm going to pick the first one, which is this guy, and I'm not going to worry again this time about the foreground. I'm only going to worry about the sky. Now in these images, the sky gave me a lot of pink clouds all in through here. I got nothing on this cloud, I got nothing in these guys, but this part of the sky for some reason had a lot of pink in it, which it doesn't look that way now, but hang on and we'll get there. So we're going to first pull up exposure, pull it down a little bit, pull back on the highlights, and then pull back on the shadows some, and then we're going to warm it up. And then we're going to hit it with some more magenta. And now we got something that we're kind of getting to where we want to be. Don't worry too much about the color, just want to be able to see and tell what it is. So when we get into Photoshop, we can really work on it. And if we pull up on the whites, it's not going to help, but if we pull down on the whites, it helps a little bit. And then we can pull up on the black. And then we can bring up our contrast. And that's going to help pull out some of that color as well. Another step we can go to take this one step farther in terms of color is go into our color panel and HSL panel. And what we can do is we can take this red, we can pull up the saturation some, and you can see it's already pulling up some of that red. We can change the color of the red if you wanted to try and get it more into that pink range that I actually saw. So I'm happy right there with that. And then also in with our magenta tone, we can pull up on the saturation of the magenta and fix the color. So if I go all the way one way, it changes it. I come the other way, it starts to change it there too. And it was more pinkish orange, so we're going to come in right around there. Saturation looks good. Luminance, I'm not going to really mess with the luminance. But we are going to correct the lens profile one more time to the Nikon 24mm 2.8. And there we go. I'm happy with how that looks. And then I'm going to sync that data all the way through. And there you go. There you have it. So now the sky on each three of these images looks really good. So the next thing we want to do is we want to export them all into Photoshop. And there's a couple of different ways people can do this. I prefer to do it this way. My computer runs a little bit better when I do it this way. I export, and then I export them as TIFFs, which I've already done, so I'm not going to redo it, but I export it as a TIFF, 16-bit at 100 resolution, and I always set a specific folder, and I keep the names as original. So closing out, actually, yeah, we'll skip it this time, and moving forward into Photoshop, you can already see that as my computer opens here, you can already see that I've stacked all these images in, and I've already aligned them into a panorama. But in order to do this, and to do it the right way, you want to go into File, Scripts, and the way I like to do it is I like to stack them. So I load files into a stack, and then I select the files that I intend to use. Photoshop will open them up, like so, and auto-align them if you have the auto-align clicked. The next step is to blend these images. Now because I have sky images open and foreground images open, I want to hide my sky images. I want to select my foreground, and I come to Edit, Auto Blend. And what that'll do is that's going to allow me to blend these images into a panorama form. And then you do the same thing. You turn that off and you blend the sky ones. And once you've done all of that, which I've already done, you can go ahead and merge each individual one so that you get rid of the individual pieces. And so that's the final product of the foreground, and that was the final product for the sky. Now, because this happened so quickly, I didn't get a chance to shoot much of a panorama this way. So what we have to do is we have to crop the image, which I already saved time and did. And we do it into a lovely vertical panorama. Now, as you can see, it doesn't look right just yet, but don't worry, we're going to fix that. Coming back into this panel profile now, what we want to do is we want to layer mask out the sky, strictly bringing this down into about the horizon line. And that was the other thing you want to check. You want to check your horizon line on the brighter image and make sure that the horizon line is all seamless, which in this image it is. On my original it wasn't, and actually you can see there's a little bit of an issue here. So we'll have to fix that, and we'll clone those out so we don't have those to deal with either. So zooming back out here, we want to give ourselves a nice space to work. So we're going to turn back on the sky, and what we're going to do is we're going to hit a layer mask button. Now what that does is it opens the layer mask as white, but I don't want it as white, I want it as black. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Shift, Delete, and I'm going to say fill with black. And now that's going to make my image disappear. But then what I'm going to do is bring in a gradient, and I'm going to go from white to black. So I'm going to reveal to hide. I know it sounds strange. But starting somewhere right around here, I'm going to hold Shift to keep it as a straight line, and I'm going to bring it right down to about there. And what that'll do is it'll create a nice gradient, and there you go. There you have the gradient. So as you can see, before and then the sky comes in. We really didn't change too much. We just added the sky. We want to check the horizon line because I believe that will still be slightly off, which it is. And again, we're going to fix that in post with some stamp tool. But we've got the color kind of where we want the color. We've got the sky right where we want the sky. So the next thing to do with this would be to, I'm just going to start a new blank layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom right in. I'm going to grab S for my stamp tool. I'm going to bring down the size to where I want it. A little smaller. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just sample my sky. Right there. And now as you can see, if I move around, I have a little preview of where I sampled. And all I'm going to do is line that up with what I currently had. And I actually want to make sure my opacity on the brush is all the way up at 100, but the flow is at 20. And then I'm just going to follow that line. And as you can see, it's not perfect, so we're going to grab the eraser tool. We're going to erase what we did, and we're going to fix it. We're going to go back to the clone stamp tool. We're going to bring our size down a little bit more. And we're going to actually do Shift and 4, and that'll bring up the flow to about 40. We're going to resample again. We want to get a nice, clean sample for that image. And then there we go. We're just going to move this guy right across. And don't worry about little mistakes. We can fix those real quick. And so there we go. I'm actually really happy with how that horizon line is looking. Now I had a little bit of a blip over here, as you can see. So I'm just going to grab my eraser tool, bring it down really small, and just come right in here. Whoop, eraser. There we go. And I'm just going to correct it just by erasing out what I had right there. So that way, that line comes right back. And there you have it. So now we got a nice clean horizon line to work with. And the next step would be to clone out these branches. And resampling a lot helps to give you the authenticity. And I really like the way that it actually just helps to blend the entire image when you sample multiple sources. No more obnoxious tree branch. We don't even have any real spots or anything that we need to remove. We got a little bit up here I'm not going to worry about right this minute. Next, I want to go ahead and bring up, let's go with a selective color channel here because I want to work on that pink and the reds that are in the sky. So with the red channel selected, I want to pay attention again into this area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this until I'm happy. And there we go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make that entire layer mask black. And then we're going to take the brush tool. We have a nice soft brush, and all we're going to do with an opacity at 20 and with white, we're just going to paint back that pink in those clouds. Next up, we're going to go ahead and do a curves layer. And with the curve, what I'm going to do is get a little bit more red. I'm going to pull up on the red here. I'm going to pull down in the shadows. And you're going to see that's going to bring up more there. And with the green, same kind of deal. We're going to pull out some of that green from both the shadows and there. And then with the blue, we're going to actually pull blue out of the highlights, but we're going to add it into the shadows a little bit. Just a little bit. And again, we're going to hit the layer mask with black. And then with the brush tool, we're just going to simply paint it back in one more time. And really all this is doing is a lot of color correction. It's really, that's all this is. This isn't adding fake color. Because a lot of people get worked up about, oh, well, you're adding fake color. Well, no, I'm not. I'm color correcting this image. This is what I saw. Unfortunately, it doesn't translate sometimes to the camera sensor the way you want it to. And in order to get it just the way we want, you want to make sure that you've done the color correction. And so now you can also see down in here we have too much of an orange color to match the sky, so we're just going to brush in some of those color corrections onto the wall. Come in here, and then we'll do one more because I'm seeing some of these greens in the selective color panel here. We're going to come down to the cyans and the greens. We'll start with cyans, and I want to make those more orange because there's patches of this orangey color kind of going on down in the water. So now we got that back. We'll go ahead and make that layer mask black as well. And then just in these areas of patchiness, paint in the appropriate color. So now some of the quicker and easier fixes for the sky are going to be coming back to the curves again. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take the curves and we're going to bring down the shadows a little bit and bringing up the highlights just a touch. And we're going to see where that changed. And we're only going to focus that on the sky itself. So we're going to go, again, that. We're going to take the gradient tool and we're just going to work the sky. And then what we want to do to preserve luminosity as opposed to saturation is we're going to just click the luminosity tab. So what that does is it takes away that saturation it gave it and it just goes and darkens that sky a little bit. And I really like how that's looking. Next, I want to work on this foreground some. So by going and making a new layer, doing Control-Shift-Delete, we're going to fill this with 50% gray. And we're going to make Command J after that does the 50% gray. And what this will do is our highlights and our shadow work to give it kind of a 3D effect. So I'm going to Command J that. So now we have two layers. I'm going to turn the top one off for now. On this bottom one, I'm going to go down to Overlay. And you can see it'll hide it. And with my brush tool, I'm going to select black as my color, hitting X, give me the default. And I'm going to work my shadows in. Now I'm going to do an opacity adjustment on the overall opacity once I've started to see where this is going to affect. So now I can see a little panel there. I'm going to bring this down, and I'm going to bring it down a lot, probably right around 38, maybe even less, 32, 31, and just enough to kind of work these shadows in. And I'm just working in areas where there are natural shadows and maybe darkening up something that should be a darker shadow into there and bringing in some of these little shadowed areas. And what that'll do is it'll add a sense of 3D-ality to this image. For me, I've been finding lately that this technique, as opposed to doing some other techniques like working just strictly with shadow and highlight adjustments in Lightroom, has given me a little bit more depth to my image and a little bit more reality to it. Now turning on the next layer, we're going to go ahead and do the overlay again, bring down the opacity again to 31, 32. But this time we're going to paint with white, and we're going to paint with a smaller brush in areas that I think are nicer highlights. So now if we toggled those two on and off, as you can see, flat, some dimension, and then bam, we hit it with some highlights. And now it's starting to look nice. And even the highlights I can probably bring down a little bit more because they are still a little much, and the shadows too. And you can see again, we'll just check it. Highlights, shadows, boom. So next I want to work on some of these greens because I want these greens to pop a little bit. So again, we're going to come into, let's see what channel mixer will give us. So yeah, we're going to come in here No, we're not going to. Actually, no, I'm not going to do channel mixer on this. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into color balance. There it is. Nope, that's not it either. Hold on. We want to bring in hue saturation. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right to the green. And I'm going to actually extend this slider out just a little bit. And I'm going to bring up the brightness on that green. So if I darken it, you can see the shadow area get darker, and then bring it up, it gets a little brighter. I'm going to saturate the green. I'm going to bring the green, change it a little bit. Yellows, we're going to do the same thing so that they encompass some of the green. Perfect. So now what I want to do is make sure that only affects the green. So this time we want to fill that layer mask again with black. Next thing I want to do is I want to come in with a little bit of vibrance. And I'm going to pull up the vibrance a little bit. Right to there. And I'm going to leave it over the entire image. And then lastly, I want to make a stamp visible layer. So I hit Command, Option, or Alt on a Mac. Mac, it's an Option, Alt on a PC rather, and Shift, and then I'm going to hit E. What that'll do is going to create this stamp visible layer. Okay, so now that that's merged the stamp visible layer, what we want to do, zoom out a little bit, we want to come up to Filter, Other, and go to High Pass Filter. Now with this High Pass Filter, what we're going to do is we're going to basically just sharpen some of these details and do it in a really unique way that doesn't introduce too awful much noise. So what we want to do now is hit it with a layer mask, fill it with black, and what we're going to do is we're going to literally paint just this foreground. So we want just the foreground nice and sharp. So now I've done that, I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to Option or Alt, click on the layer mask, and it'll show me where I've missed. And I can bring up my brush size now and just paint over those areas that I've missed. As far as the rest of the sky here, we're going to do a new layer, Stamp tool, and we're just going to paint in the blue to the sky. So that looks pretty good. And then the last thing I want to do is just hit it with a custom made vignette. So what I want to do is I want to, again, stamp visible layer. Okay, so now that gave us a new layer. And all we're going to do is apply a curves adjustment layer. We're going to lock that adjustment layer to this part of the image. And then what we want to do is we want to shift and fill it with black. And then we want to take our oval shaped marquee tool. And we can create a custom made vignette. Good. And then if I want to add on to it, what I do is I hold the shift button and I create new ones. And this is exactly how I create custom vignettes that are more or less just falls of light as opposed to an actual vignette in the traditional sense. So there we go. And then what we want to do is we want to shift, delete, and we want to fill with white. And then we're going to inverse that. So now we want to invert it, and it will fill it with black, but we want to invert our selection. So what we can do then is deselect real quick. We want to make that actually white now. And then reselect with Command Shift D, and then you can select and fill that with black. And there you go. Now you'll have a real good vignette, but you're not done yet. I'm going to come up to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. And then what I'm going to do is hit it with 250 pixels of blurring. And then what I'll do after that is bring down the opacity. Before and after, we got a really nice custom vignette. The last thing to do is to flatten your image and bring it back into Photoshop. If you guys have any questions, please leave them down in the comments. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't done so now, and I'll see you guys next time in the next tutorial. Catch you guys later.